Good God, they're multiplying. Hello and welcome again. I think we need to have a little recap on what's happened here. I have this camera, and I want to use it, and it needs film. The film it needs comes in a cassette. This is a cassette. The problem with this cassette is it scratches the crap out of my film. I got a friend of mine to print me off a cartridge that I found on the internet, designed by user brotten93722 on the website Printables. Feel free to go and check that out if you're interested. But once it printed out, it didn't quite fit together. Because I had to remove some of the side, this thing only now fits together if you put everything together in the dark and then put it in the camera, which is a way that you can use this thing, but it is a bit annoying. So it's been a few months now, and I think it's time to revisit this project. So let's see what the options are for getting this camera running with some film and some modern options. Okay, so we can buy some original cartridges from eBay. This is one. There is a slight problem. If we compare it with the original that came with the camera, which definitely fits in the camera, you might notice a slight size discrepancy. Now, while I absolutely love the design of this cartridge, and I really would love to make a reproduction of it, strangely enough, I don't have the skills or ability to design and or fold like the sheet metal into this fantastic shape and weld it together, but I think it is an absolutely stunning design. So I'm not quite sure exactly where this cartridge comes from. I suspect it might come from a Minolta 16 camera, but needless to say, buying the cartridges off eBay is a little bit risky. You might be lucky and somebody actually knows what they're looking for. I have actually come across somebody selling the Brotten 3D printed design on eBay, and I don't know if the person who would be selling that would have tested it to make sure that it would work in the camera, or if it's got light traps and all that kind of thing. Now, the other thing is I could try very diligently to hunt down more of these. That is an option. I haven't seen them come up very often, and as far as I can tell, they stopped production of these in about the 1970s. So my guess would be that no matter what you do, the light trap material here is probably crumbling on all of the models you can find. Also, one thing about this design I don't particularly like is it's quite loose here. You do need to put some sticky tape on there. It's not the worst, but it's just not quite ideal. Our next option is to buy a modern reproduction. So far, the only modern reproductions that I've come across are this design by user Brotten. Again, I really appreciate that Brotten took the time to design and release this for people to use. However, there's a couple of features that I don't think are quite right. For one, there's a very small gap for the light sealing material. Now, it's quite possible that it was designed in mind to have sort of a flocking tape as opposed to velvet, which would make a lot of sense and not a bad idea. I just couldn't find any in time that I could acquire before I wanted to take this on holiday, and really jamming some velvet in that space does not work. I also don't know that if you were to buy these from eBay or some other seller, if they would have went to the trouble to put light trap material in there. Another issue, if we're comparing to the original 1970s design, is that the spool or the take-up is larger than the original. And this is a problem because this camera doesn't count the distance between frames. It merely just counts the revolutions of spinning the spindle. So the problem with that is that you change the gap over time as you roll more film on. That's pretty small in comparison to sort of the size of the spindle. But because we start with a different size in this design, the spacing is not going to be quite right. I'm not sure if it's really a problem because I've never really shot this thing using this size spindle, but it's just something to be aware of in the design. However, there are a few things in the design that I really like. You can see the designer here left the bottom of the spindle flat and didn't put a hole in the bottom there. And that's kind of the difference between 3D printing and injection molding. So it's much easier to 3D print this in place without supports and other fancy things, and just have it straight on there and then use your other part to hold it in the center. And that works really well, and I think that the designer thought really hard about how to make this work for 3D printing. So the last option is to make my own, and anyone who's seen the previous entries in this project might be aware of my long-running series of failures. With these options in mind, I now have to think about the project and decide how I'm going to proceed. I bought a 3D printer! Now I'm not going to go into reasons why I bought this printer over others, but let's just carry on safe with the knowledge that my dedication to this project cannot be questioned. And I hope this is the most expensive film cartridge I ever make. So where to begin? Now I know that many people use fancy 3D modelling software designed for engineers in the industry to quickly and efficiently generate 3D models. But I learnt Blender about a decade ago and I refused to pay for Onshape membership, so Blender it is! Let's just open up something simple and learn the past decade of improvements that have come to Blender and make sure that we... oh my god, this is very different. Skip past all of that and all of the troubles and we'll try to make something that matches to reality. Oh my god, that worked. Okay, so we've built a blank and we know that it fits in the space within the camera. So our dimensions are roughly accurate. This is just sort of the outline shape of the print that we want to make. And now all we need to do is just fill in the rest of the details. How hard could that be? So just to recap, there are a few really nice things about this design. Now, aside from having to use flocking in here, I think we're going to need to modify it so that we can use the velvet that I've bought. But again, we have this flat side here, which is really useful. So there's a lot of ideas that I can sort of look at in here to understand how this works with 3D printing. And we should be able to carry some of those ideas forward and yeah, come up with something hopefully half reasonable. But we also have to keep in mind some of the features from the original. Now the only thing I don't really like is, as you just saw, the caps kind of fly off, but we do need to sort of maintain the sort of spindle width. Now I suspect that the designer, B Rotten, didn't actually have an original cartridge to measure from. That's where I have an advantage. Okay, to just re-evaluate this project a little bit, I've actually re-downloaded the design that B Rotten made, and I've printed it up myself. This is for a few reasons. I'm just checking to see that if maybe recalibration would help, but I think anyone who prints this model is going to run into some issues. So this is really tight to get on, and it's kind of a little bit large when you do that. It sort of pokes out. There are some little divots in the side, and that's to hold the lids on, and it does a really good job of holding those lids on. In terms of the size and the fit, we'll just give that a quick try, and that's extremely tight. And I'd say it's actually slightly too long as well. So these are all things that we're going to have to readjust. Now, while the designer B Rotten has been very kind in releasing this under a non-commercial license, I think I'm just going to design it from scratch. Lastly, I think if you download this, you're kind of set for failure in some ways, because those really tight caps squash this gap here. It's a little bit hard to see. So I think with this design, you always run into the issue where this gap here is crushed by the lid. Now you might be able to adjust the lid and get it uncrushed, but as mentioned, it doesn't quite fit in there well. So let's get redesigning. Alright, so this is the first print, and let's just give it a quick... Yeah, I see what went on there. Yeah, when I modeled it and mirrored it, I got the distance slightly wrong, but otherwise, it looks pretty good. I think we might just need to give it another revision or two and we might be close enough. That only took a few hours. Okay, so it fits. Now don't worry about this sitting a little askew, you just need to get it to wind on a bit. And that looks to be a correctly sized cartridge. So what are the things that we've changed over time? Well, from the previous one, we've brought the size in. Another curious feature is that we've changed which way the little slot goes. So you're going to need to wrap the film back around. This sort of hooks in as opposed to just being there. I think both of them work fine, and you need to have like a bit of sticky tape anyway. But the caps and everything fit much nicer. The other thing is I've just printed this all in green PLA plastic for the 3D printing nerds out there, so it's a little bit easier to see. But I really like how the PLA plastic comes out. If we compare it to the PETG, it's very shiny and it's a little bit rougher. So I think I'm gonna move forward with PLA if I can get away with it. And here we go. This is kind of the advantage of 3D printing, is that we can just sort of change a few parameters really quickly and away we go again. So I'm fairly happy with that. All I need to do is put some velvet in here. I did buy a reasonable amount of velvet from a fabric shop. It's just this stuff here, very fuzzy, keeps the light out. So we're just going to fill that with velvet, and then we're going to load this cartridge for the first time. And here we go, a loaded cartridge. Now I don't really know if this is light tight. We're just gonna have to take some photos and find out. So a problem that we ran into, it's perhaps a little bit difficult to see here, is that the PLA plastic is not the best at sticking together. Now this could be improved by sort of reheating the plastic in place and trying to sort of reform it, but as you can see, they just kind of fall apart a bit. Now I've read up a little bit, and I think I'm going to try to reprint these in PETG plastic. So I reprinted it and I made one slight change. I also want the film to slot in but not go all the way to the bottom, so it just kind of sits in the correct position. These are printed okay, they are a little bit shiny, they are a little bit rougher, but considering that this is just a sort of spindle that the film needs to go on, I think we're going to get away with it. So all that's left is to reload the film and to put it in. I mean, it took 2 weeks, but I'm not used to projects kind of working out this well. This is a bit of a novelty to me. I mean, something has to go wrong so that we can bring back balance to the universe. Fret not, viewer, balance has been restored to the universe. Okay, it's not as bad as it looks. This was just kind of a quick test and I was in a rush, so I made up some caffeinol and I forgot that it's an exothermic reaction, so what should normally be done at about, I don't know, 20 degrees in 10 minutes became 35 degrees at 7, and there just wasn't quite enough compensation. It's really difficult to sort of show you here. I'll see if I can get a quick scan of this done. But as you can see, there's still a little bit of scratching going on and it's very dark, but there are no light leaks. That is a huge improvement. So all that leaves is to load it up again and try again, but now with some developer that isn't at 35 degrees Celsius. I was much smarter this time around. It was done at 30 degrees and 3 minutes this time. So as you can see, it's messed up the contrast pretty bad. These pictures aren't exactly looking great, but that wasn't really the purpose of this test. It was more about seeing if the cartridges we made are light tight and if the felt used in them is giving scratches. You can see there is a scratch there, but that's more about mishandling than anything else. So in the same tank I decided to develop some Foamer Creative 200 at the same time, And you can see that it's got the same contrast issues. So we're not really looking at anything unique. It's just general poor handling and the really hard water that I used, but mostly just that super fast development time that's causing these issues. So I think this project has taught me that having a 3D printer is going to be a real big complement to my silly ideas when it comes to all of this photography stuff. Another thing to make note of is, of course, the negatives that this camera makes are tiny, so your image quality is never going to be great. Any scratches, any sort of water residue or anything, it's going to show up real bad. But I don't think that should get in the way of stopping you from having fun. I mean, the idea with this camera is it's kind of small and you can take it with you anywhere. It shouldn't take too much space to like stack these together in a bag and off you go. You can have lots of photos. Each one of these rolls holds about 20 shots, so you can take quite a lot of photos pretty easily with these on holiday with you. So now I can actually use this camera, but I don't think that's quite the end of the series. I do want to revisit the film slicer, and we might make progress on that. Again, I've got the 3D printer, it's gonna help. But another thing would be developing. Now, I'll talk about this later, perhaps in its own video, but there's only so many ways that you can develop this film in modern setups. You can buy a Jobo reel, which is what I've done, and that's really handy because it works with my Jobo system and I can use all of that, and I can also develop other rolls of film at the same time, so it's pretty good. But a lot of people out there don't have a Jobo, and also the reels are kind of expensive, and if you want to have like multiple of them in the one sort of developing tank, you're gonna rack up quite a lot of expense trying to do that. Other than that, I mean, you can do sort of tray processing where you just have some trays of chemicals, but you need a darkroom to be able to do that. So maybe I should look into some other ideas of how you can actually develop this film. I do know that I'm going to look more into like different developers and see if that there's any like general advice I can give for that, because so far all I've really used is like Caffeinol to develop this stuff, and that's great for a lot of people because it's quick, it's easy, and it's pretty cheap, but not everyone wants to make up their own chemistry, so I think I'll look into that a little bit later. Well, that one took a lot longer than anticipated. I just wanted you all to know that you can go and download the cartridge if you'd like. It's under an open source non-commercial license. It may have changes in the future. I'm still working with the design, wanting to make it as robust and as durable as possible for those who might want to use it. Oh my god, this is so much worse than the other one. Do not buy it.